Knowledge, humanity's greatest achievement. The accumulated wisdom of scientists who dedicate their lives to advancing civilization. Research that cures diseases, creates sustainable energy, and pushes the boundaries of what's possible. But in the wrong hands, knowledge becomes a weapon. Research intended to save lives can be twisted to end them. And the brilliant minds who create tomorrow's breakthroughs can become prisoners forced to build tomorrow's nightmares. This is the story of a network that hunted the world's brightest scientists. A story of abduction so carefully orchestrated that families believed their loved ones had simply vanished. And this is the story of how an elite global force discovered that knowledge itself had become a commodity sold to the highest bidder. And those bidders were terrorists. It began with a pattern that shouldn't exist. Over 36 months, 41 scientists disappeared across 14 countries. Not students, not researchers early in their careers. These were leading experts in highly specialized fields: synthetic biology, advanced chemistry, nuclear physics, drone engineering, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity. Each disappearance followed a similar script. The scientist would attend an international conference, accept a consulting opportunity, or respond to a collaboration invitation. Then, nothing. No contact with family, no activity on financial accounts, no digital footprint. As if they had ceased to exist, families reported them missing. Universities launched investigations. Law enforcement opened cases. But the trails went cold immediately. No witnesses. No surveillance footage of value. No ransom demands. Just void. Traditional authorities treated them as isolated incidents. Academic professionals sometimes disappear voluntarily. Personal crises, financial troubles, secret relationships. The idea that these cases were connected seemed implausible. These were scientists from different countries, different disciplines, different institutions. What possible connection could exist? But deep within Secret Elite's intelligence division, an analyst saw what others missed. The scientists shared one critical characteristic. Their research had dual-use potential. Work on synthetic biology could create vaccines or bioweapons. Advances in chemistry could yield clean energy or explosives. Nuclear physics knowledge could power cities or devastate them. Drone engineering could deliver packages or bombs. AI research could optimize logistics or cyber attacks. Every missing scientist possessed knowledge that could be weaponized. And they had all disappeared within weeks of publishing significant breakthroughs or presenting at major conferences. The analyst's hypothesis was terrifying. Someone was systematically abducting scientists with weapons-relevant expertise. Not for ransom, not for political leverage, but for their knowledge. Secret Elite escalated the investigation to maximum priority. If the assessment was correct, they were facing something unprecedented. An industrial-scale brain drain operation that was arming hostile actors with cutting-edge scientific knowledge. Phase 1 was pattern analysis. The task force examined every detail of the 41 disappearances: travel records, conference attendance, communication patterns, professional networks. What emerged was a sophisticated hunting strategy. The scientists were targeted immediately after achieving breakthroughs. A synthetic biologist who published a paper on rapid virus mutation techniques disappeared 3 weeks later. A chemical engineer who presented research on novel explosive compounds vanished days after his conference presentation. A nuclear physicist who developed new enrichment protocols went missing within a month of his findings becoming public. The abductions weren't random opportunism. They were planned operations executed by professionals who understood the value of scientific knowledge and how to identify targets worth acquiring. Surveillance of recent conferences revealed the methodology. Individuals posing as academic recruiters, corporate headhunters, or research collaborators made contact with promising scientists. They offered lucrative opportunities, consulting contracts, research partnerships, speaking engagements at prestigious institutions. The offers came with travel arrangements already made, luxury accommodations promised, and generous compensation guaranteed. Scientists, flattered by the attention and excited by professional opportunities, accepted. They traveled to meetings that seemed legitimate, and they disappeared. The operation's sophistication became clear through digital forensics. The recruiting organizations had professional websites, verifiable business addresses, and phone numbers that connected to actual offices. Job offers came on official letterhead. Communication used proper academic language. Background checks on the recruiters revealed credentials that appeared authentic. Everything was fake. The companies were shells. The offices were mail drops. The credentials were forged. But the deception was good enough that intelligent, cautious scientists believed they were engaging with legitimate opportunities. The abduction phase was equally professional. Scientists were typically taken during transit, between airports and hotels, during ground transportation to supposed meeting locations, or from hotel rooms in the middle of the night. Sedation was used to prevent resistance. Victims were moved quickly across borders using falsified documents, and within 48 hours, they vanished completely from any surveillance grid. But where were they going? And who was behind the operation? The breakthrough came from signals intelligence. An encrypted communication between two individuals discussing acquisition schedules and knowledge transfer protocols was intercepted. The language was too specific to be commercial. Terms like weaponization timeline and technical extraction suggested something far darker. The task force traced the communication to a network operating across 6 countries. At the coordination level, a cell managed targeting, recruitment, abduction logistics, and delivery to clients. Below them, specialized units handled specific functions. Talent scouts identified valuable scientists. Recruitment teams made contact and secured travel commitments. Abduction teams executed the kidnappings, and transport teams moved victims to holding facilities. But the most disturbing discovery was the client base. The scientists weren't being held for ransom or used directly by the abduction network. They were being sold to terrorist organizations, rogue state actors, and extremist groups willing to pay millions for access to weapons-relevant expertise. The business model was brutally efficient. A scientist with knowledge of bioweapon development could be sold for $3 to $5 million. An expert in nuclear enrichment commanded even higher prices. The clients received not just the scientist, but their research data, laboratory, notebooks, and most critically, their coerced cooperation in weaponization projects. Intelligence intercepts revealed the horror of what happened after purchase. Scientists were held in isolated facilities, some in remote compounds, others in underground laboratories built specifically for forced research. They were given equipment, materials, and deadlines. Refusal resulted in threats against family members back home, physical torture, or in some cases, elimination and replacement with another kidnapped expert. The clients wanted specific outputs. A terrorist organization seeking to develop a biological weapon needed a virologist to engineer pathogens. An extremist group planning chemical attacks required a chemist to synthesize toxins. A rogue actor pursuing nuclear capabilities demanded physicists to optimize enrichment processes. And the scientists, held against their will, isolated from the world, and terrorized into compliance, had no choice but to apply their knowledge to the financial scale was staggering. Over 3 years, the network had generated an estimated $230 million from scientist sales. The money flowed through complex laundering operations, cryptocurrency exchanges, shell companies in offshore jurisdictions, and real estate investments. Profits were split between network leadership and reinvested into expanding operations, improving recruitment methods, bribing border officials. But the human cost went beyond the scientists themselves. Their families lived in agony, not knowing if their loved ones were alive or dead, hoping for ransom demands that never came, and mourning disappearances that defied explanation. Universities lost irreplaceable expertise. Research projects were abandoned. And most tragically, knowledge intended to benefit humanity was being twisted into weapons meant to destroy it. Secret elite faced an enormous challenge. The scientists were being held at unknown locations by clients across multiple continents. The abduction network operated through layers of compartmentalization. Recruitment teams didn't know where victims were taken. Transport teams didn't know final destinations. And coordination cells maintained operational security through encryption and dead drops. But the task force had capabilities that the network didn't anticipate. Deep surveillance, technical penetration of encrypted systems, human intelligence assets embedded in extremist organizations, and most critically, the authority to operate across borders without legal constraints. Phase 2 was infiltration. An undercover operative, posing as a corrupt academic administrator with access to promising scientists, made contact with the recruitment network. Over 2 months, credibility was established. The operative provided information about fictional scientists with weapons-relevant expertise. Trust was built. Eventually, the operative was invited deeper into the operation. Access to communication channels, introduction to coordination cell members, and most critically, information about holding facilities where scientists were kept before delivery to clients. The intelligence was devastating. 11 facilities across 6 countries, warehouses converted to detention centers, rural compounds isolated from population centers, and in one case, a decommissioned research laboratory that had been secretly maintained for forced scientific work. But there was a complication. Of the 41 missing scientists, only 17 were confirmed alive and in holding facilities. Intelligence suggested that 24 had already been delivered to clients, some as recently as 2 weeks prior, others over a year ago. Those scientists were now in terrorist compounds, rogue state facilities, or extremist strongholds scattered across 3 continents. The task force made a decision. They would execute a 2-phase operation. Phase 1 would dismantle the abduction network and rescue scientists still in holding facilities. Phase 2 would locate and extract scientists already sold to clients. A far more dangerous mission requiring deep infiltration into hostile territories. The first operation was planned with surgical precision. Simultaneous raids on all 11 holding facilities, coordinated strikes on recruitment operation offices, and arrests of network leadership. 0 hour was set for 0400 across all time zones. The night of the operation, the network believed they were untouchable. Their compartmentalized structure, encrypted communications, and political connections in corrupt jurisdictions made them feel invulnerable. They were wrong. In a rural compound outside Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, 4 scientists were held in converted barracks, 2 biochemists, a chemist, and a physicist. They were scheduled for delivery to a client in 48 hours. When the task force breached the facility, guards attempted to destroy evidence and eliminate the scientists to prevent rescue. They failed. The breach was too fast. Within minutes, the compound was secured. Guards were detained, and the 4 scientists, malnourished, traumatized but alive, were evacuated to safety. In a warehouse district in Karachi, Pakistan, 3 scientists, all experts in drone warfare and remote systems, were being held in basement cells. Intelligence suggested they were being forced to design attack drone specifications for a terrorist organization. The raid was complicated by civilian proximity, but the task force executed flawlessly. The scientists were extracted without civilian casualties, and evidence was secured documenting the drone designs they had been forced to create. In Eastern Europe, a decommissioned research facility had been secretly converted into a forced laboratory. 5 scientists, chemists, and materials engineers were being compelled to develop explosive compounds. When the task force arrived, they found a fully equipped laboratory with industrial chemicals, testing equipment, and notebooks documenting forced research. The scientists were rescued mid-project, preventing the completion of weapons designs that would have been used in future attacks. Across 6 countries, the pattern repeated. Every holding facility was raided. Every scientist in custody was rescued. 17 lives reclaimed from a nightmare that most people couldn't imagine. But the operation didn't stop there. Network leadership, operating from offices disguised as international consulting firms, was targeted simultaneously. In Dubai, 3 coordination cell members were arrested with complete operational records, scientist profiles, client lists, financial transactions, and delivery schedules. The data was catastrophic to the network's continued existence. Recruitment team members across 8 countries were detained. Transport coordinators were arrested at border crossings. Talent scouts who identified vulnerable scientists were prosecuted. The entire infrastructure that enabled the operation was dismantled in a single coordinated strike. By dawn, the first phase was complete. 17 scientists rescued from holding facilities. 73 network operatives arrested. Complete operational records seized. The abduction pipeline was destroyed, but 24 scientists remained in hostile hands. This was where the mission became exponentially more dangerous. Phase 2 required months of planning. The task force had to locate scientists held by terrorist organizations, rogue states, and extremist groups across 3 continents. Some were in compound facilities in lawless regions. Others were in underground laboratories beneath legitimate-appearing buildings. All were under heavy guard and isolated from potential rescue. Secret Elite deployed specialized extraction teams. Elite operators trained in hostage rescue from hostile territories. Using intelligence gathered from the network's seized records, they identified probable locations for each missing scientist. The extraction operations were executed over 4 months, one at a time, each carefully planned and precisely executed. In a remote compound in North Africa, 2 scientists held by a terrorist organization were extracted in a nighttime raid. In a facility operated by a rogue state actor in Central Asia, 3 scientists were recovered through a complex infiltration and escape operation. In Southeast Asia, a scientist forced to work on cyber weapon development was rescued from a guarded residence. Not every extraction succeeded. In 3 cases, intelligence arrived too late. The scientists had been eliminated after completing their forced research, their knowledge extracted, and their lives deemed expendable. Their families would finally receive answers, but not the reunion they desperately hoped for. By the end of Phase 2, 21 of the 24 scientists sold to clients had been recovered alive. Combined with the 17 rescued from holding facilities, 38 of the original 41 missing scientists were saved. 3 had been killed by their captors. But 38 families were reunited with loved ones they believed they would never see again. The rescued scientists required extensive support: medical treatment for malnutrition and injuries, psychological care for trauma, protection from potential retaliation, and most critically, debriefing to understand what knowledge had been extracted and what weapons designs had been created under duress. The intelligence gathered was sobering. Several scientists had been forced to complete weapons research that their captors now possessed: bioweapon designs, chemical weapon formulas, nuclear enrichment protocols, drone attack specifications. The task force immediately began operations to neutralize these threats, destroying laboratories, seizing research materials, and eliminating the capability of terrorist organizations to weaponize the stolen knowledge. The prosecution phase was comprehensive. The 73 arrested network members faced charges in multiple jurisdictions: kidnapping, human trafficking, conspiracy to aid terrorism, and in cases where scientists died in captivity, murder. Evidence was overwhelming, so convictions came swiftly. Sentences were measured in life terms. But perhaps most impactful was the disruption to clients. Terrorist organizations that had paid millions for scientists found their facilities raided and their weapons programs destroyed. Rogue state actors discovered that their covert research laboratories had been exposed. Extremist groups learned that the knowledge they acquired through forced labor was now a liability. International authorities knew what they possessed and targeted them for elimination. The financial networks that enabled the operation were systematically dismantled. Assets totaling $190 million were seized. Shell companies dissolved. Cryptocurrency wallets emptied. The criminal infrastructure that generated hundreds of millions through knowledge trafficking was obliterated. The network's destruction sent a message that reverberated through the criminal underworld and terrorist organizations worldwide. Scientific knowledge was no longer a commodity that could be acquired through abduction and forced labor. The consequences of attempting such operations were catastrophic: complete network dismantlement, lengthy prison sentences, and exposure of client organizations to targeted operations. But the public knew minimal details. Governments released statements about successful operations against international kidnapping networks. Media coverage mentioned rescued scientists, but omitted the full scope: the systematic targeting, the forced weapons research, the sale to terrorist clients, and the sophisticated extraction operations required to save them. The rescued scientists returned to their lives, forever changed by their experiences. Some resumed their research, determined to continue work that was meant to benefit humanity, not harm it. Others stepped away from science entirely, unable to reconcile their knowledge with how it had been exploited. All carried the trauma of months or years in captivity, forced to betray their principles under threat of death. But they were alive. They were free. And the network that hunted them had been destroyed so completely that it could never reconstitute. This is what Secret Elite does. They protect not just lives, but knowledge itself, the accumulated wisdom of humanity's brightest minds. They prevent science from being twisted into weapons. They rescue those who dedicate their lives to progress from those who would exploit them for destruction. The operation is closed. The scientists are safe. The network is destroyed. But the mission continues. Because in a world where knowledge is power, there will always be those who seek to steal it, weaponize it, and use it for evil. And when that moment comes, the response will be the same. Silent, global, unstoppable. Not on our watch, not while we breathe, not ever.